The first week I moved into my new house, my neighbor reported me to the HOA 4 times and had workers rip out my garden while I was still living there. The first time my neighbor smiled while lying to my face, she was holding a blueberry bundt cake and wearing a pale yellow cardigan like she was auditioning for nicest woman in America. 3 days later, I got my first HOA violation. I'm not kidding. I had only been in the house for 11 days when the letter showed up taped to my front door in a bright orange envelope that said courtesy notice in giant black letters, which already felt aggressive for something calling itself courtesy. The complaint said my garbage bins were visible from the street for an unreasonable amount of time, my lawn edging was uneven, and my welcome sign was non-compliant seasonal decor. My welcome sign said, "Hello, sunshine." Apparently that was a threat to suburban order. My name is Ava Mitchell. I'm 32, newly divorced, and last spring I moved into a little 2-story house in a planned community outside Charlotte because I wanted one thing: peace. Not excitement. Not drama. Definitely not a neighborhood feud with a woman who had decorative geese by her mailbox and too much free time. But peace is not always what you get just because you ask nicely. When I bought the house on Juniper Ridge Lane, I thought it looked safe in the most ordinary way possible. Hydrangeas, clean sidewalks, kids on scooters, matching black mailboxes. The kind of neighborhood where people wave while walking their dogs and pretend they don't know everyone's business even though they absolutely do. After what I'd been through with my ex-husband, ordinary sounded like heaven. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years. By the end, our entire relationship had become one long exercise in me shrinking myself to fit whatever mood he was in that day. He hated noise, hated mess, hated when I disagreed with him in front of other people. When I finally left, my mother told me, "Honey, you don't just need a new house, you need new air." So I bought one. The house wasn't huge, but it was mine. White siding, green shutters, a tiny porch just big enough for 2 rocking chairs, and a crepe myrtle tree in the front yard that bloomed like it had something to prove. On my first morning there, I drank coffee barefoot in my kitchen while the sun came through the windows, and I remember thinking, this is the first place I've ever lived where nobody can make me feel unwelcome. That thought aged horribly. The woman with the bundt cake introduced herself on day 2. "Hi there," she called as I was dragging in another box from my car. "You must be the new owner. I'm Cynthia Delacroix. I live right next door." She said it with that polished, almost musical voice some women use when they've spent years being admired at charity luncheons. She was probably late 50s, maybe early 60s, with perfectly highlighted hair, glossy lipstick, and the kind of posture that said she believed rules were for other people until she could use them as weapons. Or her yard looked like it had been measured with a ruler. Even her porch ferns seemed disciplined. "I'm Ava," I said, setting the box down. "Nice to meet you." "Well, welcome to the neighborhood." She held out the cake. "We're a very close-knit community here." That should have warned me, but I was still naive enough to think close-knit meant friendly. I laughed and took the cake. "Thank you, that's really sweet." Her eyes flicked past me to the porch. "Oh, and just so you know, the association can be a little particular." "About what?" "Everything," she said, smiling. Then she stepped a little closer and lowered her voice like she was doing me a favor. "But don't worry. I know how things work around here." I remember smiling back and thinking, great. Helpful neighbor. I was so stupid. The first violation came 3 days later. The second came 4 days after that. This one said a garden flag I'd put near the walkway was in an unauthorized placement zone. The third said my front door color, which had been that exact navy blue when I bought the house, did not match the approved palette on file. The fourth cited excessive evening patio lighting, which was actually one string of warm white lights from Target. I called the HOA office after the third notice because I honestly thought there had to be some mix-up. A tired-sounding woman named Denise answered. " 'Hi,' I said, trying to stay calm. I just moved into 114 Juniper Ridge, and I keep getting violation notices for things that were here before I even bought the place. I heard keyboard clicking. One moment. Yes, I see them. Can you tell me who's reporting these? I can't disclose homeowner complaints. So these are complaints? Not routine inspections? Pause. Some are complaint-driven, she said carefully. I looked out the kitchen window toward Cynthia's house. Her blinds twitched. That was the first moment my stomach dropped. Because suddenly all those little interactions replayed in my head differently. The way Cynthia had asked on day 4, "Are you planning to keep those flower pots there permanently?" The way she'd stood at the property line while I was unloading patio chairs and said, "Most people here try to keep things cohesive." The way she'd added with a little laugh, "You'll figure it out." That evening, I was hauling my garbage bins in from the curb when Cynthia appeared like she had been waiting for the exact second I'd be annoyed enough to be off balance. "Tough luck about those notices," she said. I turned slowly. "You know about them?" Her expression didn't change. "Oh, word gets around." "I've been here less than 2 weeks." "Yes," she said. "And first impressions really matter in a neighborhood like this." There was something about the way she said it. Not advice, not concern, a warning dressed up as etiquette. I set the bins down. "Are you the one filing complaints on my house?" She actually put a hand to her chest. "Ava, I would never do something so unfriendly." Then she smiled. That same smile. The one that said the opposite. I stared at her for a second, and I swear I felt something shift in me. Not fear exactly. Recognition. I had seen this type before. Not loud, not sloppy. The kind of person who built little traps and then stood back to watch you step into them. "Okay," I said. She tilted her head. "Okay." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile of my own. "I'm just learning the neighborhood." And that part was true. I was learning that every Thursday evening, Cynthia hosted wine on her patio for a rotating group of women from the street. I was learning that she had been on the HOA landscaping committee for 6 years and acted like unpaid royalty. I was learning that the current HOA president, a tired man named Bruce Halpern, hadn't attended the last 3 community meetings in person and let Cynthia help with almost everything. And I was learning that when people said, "That's just Cynthia," what they really meant was, she gets away with it, so nobody stops her. If you've ever dealt with one of those neighborhood tyrants who hides behind smiles and bylaws, you already know this part. They count on you wanting peace more than justice. At first I did. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I should keep my head down, fix whatever tiny thing they complained about, and move on. I had just rebuilt my life. I did not want another war. Then, 2 Saturdays later, I walked outside in my pajamas with my coffee mug still in my hand and found a man from the HOA contracted landscaping company ripping out the lavender I had planted along my front walkway. I nearly dropped my mug. "Excuse me," I yelled, running down the porch steps. "What are you doing?" The man looked startled. Removing unapproved plantings?" "What? Who told you to do that?" He pointed across the street. And there, standing in the morning sun like she was watching theater she'd personally funded, was Cynthia. She gave me a tiny wave. That was the moment I stopped wanting peace, because I realized she wasn't trying to keep the neighborhood pretty. She was trying to make sure I understood my place in it. And standing there barefoot in the grass, staring at the lavender I had planted with my own hands, piled in a black contractor bag, I made myself one quiet promise. If Cynthia wanted to rule this neighborhood so badly, I was going to learn exactly how, and then I was going to take it away from her. But I had no idea, not yet, that by the end of that month, I'd uncover why Cynthia was really so desperate to control the HOA. And it had nothing to do with landscaping. The crazy thing is, once I stopped reacting emotionally and started paying attention, Cynthia got sloppy. People like her always do. They spend so much time controlling the narrative that they forget someone might quietly collect the facts. For the first few weeks after the lavender incident, I played dumb. That was the hardest part, honestly. I smiled when I saw her. I stopped asking direct questions. I even thanked her once when she kindly reminded me that my porch chairs needed matching cushions to stay within community standards. There were no rules about cushions, but I just nodded and said, "Good to know." Because by then, I had realized something important. Cynthia loved feeling smarter than everyone else. She loved explaining, guiding, correcting, and the more comfortable she felt, the more she talked. So I let her. Meanwhile, I started going to every HOA meeting. Not the glamorous kind you see in movies. I'm talking folding chairs in the clubhouse, stale coffee in cardboard trays, a malfunctioning projector, and the same 6 people complaining about drainage and barking dogs. The first time I walked in, conversation actually paused for half a second. Like everyone was trying to figure out whether I was there to apologize or surrender. I did neither. Bruce Halpern, the HOA president, was already seated at the front table with his reading glasses low on his nose and the expression of a man who regretted every volunteer commitment he had made since 2009. Cynthia sat beside him with a legal pad, even though she wasn't technically on the board anymore. That detail mattered. I only learned it because I asked Denise from the office for a copy of the HOA structure, committee assignments, and bylaws. I framed it like I was trying to understand how things work, which was true. But what I really wanted to know was why Cynthia acted like the queen of Juniper Ridge when her name wasn't on the official board roster. Turns out, she had been HOA president 2 years earlier. Now she was just chair of the Community Appearance Advisory Committee, which sounded fake because it basically was. It had no enforcement power, no vote on fines, no legal authority to direct vendors. And yet somehow, landscapers were taking orders from her. That sat in my brain like a pebble in a shoe. At the second meeting I attended, a man named Terrence from Maple Court raised his hand and said, "I'd like to know why we're spending so much on common area flower rotation when the back gate still doesn't close properly." Before Bruce could answer, Cynthia jumped in. "The flower rotation maintains property values," she said crisply. "And the gate issue is being reviewed?" Terrence frowned. "By who?" "By the appropriate people." That answer irritated me way more than it should have. After the meeting, I lingered by the coffee station while people gathered their papers. That's where I met Nina. Now listen, every neighborhood has one person who knows everything but doesn't speak unless they have decided you've earned it. Nina Patel was that person. Mid-40s, runner's build, kind eyes, blunt mouth. She lived 3 houses down from me and had 2 teenage sons who, based on neighborhood gossip, had once accidentally broken Cynthia's decorative bird bath with a soccer ball and then been talked about like federal criminals for 6 months. Nina stirred powdered creamer into her coffee and said, without looking at me, "You're handling this better than most people do." I glanced at her. "Handling what?" She finally looked up. "Cynthia." So I wasn't imagining it. "She's been filing complaints on me since I moved in," I said quietly. Nina gave one short laugh. "Since before you moved in, probably. She did the same thing to the last owner. Drove her nuts over mulch color." I stared. "Seriously?" "Mm-hmm. Sharon was a widow, kept to herself. Cynthia decided that meant she could micromanage her into compliance." Nina took a sip. "Then Sharon sold and moved closer to her daughter in Raleigh. Cynthia has treated your house like an extension of her own property ever since." That explained the entitlement, but not the reach. "How does she get vendors to listen to her?" I asked. Nina's expression changed just a little. "That," she said, "is a better question." Then she tossed her cup and walked out before I could ask more. That night, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor with my laptop, a legal pad, and every HOA document I'd managed to collect. Bylaws, budget summaries, meeting minutes, committee descriptions, vendor invoices. Most people would call that miserable. I call it healing. There is something deeply satisfying about turning confusion into evidence. I noticed three things almost immediately. First, the landscaping budget was weird. Not dramatic enough to scream fraud, but messy. Repeated charges for special appearance corrections. Extra labor hours with vague notes. Emergency seasonal adjustments. All billed by the same vendor, Green Horizon Groundskeeping. Second, those charges had started climbing the year Cynthia stepped down as president. Third, Bruce almost never signed off alone. Cynthia's name kept appearing in meeting minutes as consulting liaison. Consulting liaison. That woman had invented herself a throne. The next clue came by accident. A few mornings later, I was working from home at my dining table when a Green Horizon truck pulled up across the street near the community entrance beds. I only noticed because one of the men stepped out holding a clipboard, and Cynthia came marching out of her house in white capris like she'd been waiting at the window. She didn't just greet him. She handed him papers. Then she pointed toward my side of the street. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the blinds. Not because I had a full plan yet, just instinct. The crew worked for 20 minutes near the entrance, then one of them walked over to the narrow strip of mulch beside my driveway and started measuring. I opened my front door so fast I scared him. "Can I help you?" I asked. He blinked. I'm just checking a redesign request." "A request from who?" Oh, he hesitated, then looked over his shoulder at Cynthia. That was all I needed. "Please stop work on my property line until you can show me a signed authorization from the board," I said. The man's whole face changed. He knew. He absolutely knew this was shady. "I'll check with my supervisor," he muttered. Cynthia was on my lawn in seconds, smiling like she was diffusing a misunderstanding she personally created. "Ava, there's no need to be confrontational," she said. "We're just trying to improve the visual flow on this side of the street." "We?" She clasped her hands. "The neighborhood." "No," I said. "You." Her smile tightened. For 1 second, the mask slipped, and under it was exactly what I thought. Not concern, not pride, not even pettiness. Fear. Tiny, sharp, immediate fear. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about control. Cynthia wasn't bullying me because she enjoyed it, though she definitely did. She was protecting something. Something tied to the HOA. Something that made her panic the second anyone asked for paperwork. So I smiled back. The same way she always smiled at me. Polite, calm, a little too still. "From now on," I said, "I'd like copies of every request involving my property." She recovered quickly. "Of course." But her voice had changed. And that night, Nina texted me for the first time. "Or if you're digging into the landscaping invoices, don't ask Bruce first. He'll warn her." I sat up straighter on my couch and stared at the message. Then a second text came through. "Ask for 18 months of vendor approvals, especially the ones marked emergency." And Ava? Cynthia's son works for Green Horizon. Different last name. She never mentions it. I actually said, "Oh, you sneaky little witch," out loud to my empty living room. Because there it was. Not proof yet, but motive. And once I had motive, I knew exactly what came next. I was going to the next board meeting with receipts. What I didn't know yet was that Cynthia had already realized I was onto her. And by the time that meeting started, she had one last move prepared for me, right in front of the entire neighborhood. The night of the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse parking lot was fuller than I had ever seen it. That was Cynthia's doing. She had spent the entire week casually mentioning to people that I planned to raise accusations about how the neighborhood was managed. The message spread exactly the way she wanted it to. Ava, the new girl, was stirring trouble. Ava didn't understand how things worked here. Ava might try to disrupt the harmony of the community, which meant half the street showed up to watch. I walked into the room carrying a slim black folder and a calm I didn't actually feel. Cynthia was already seated beside Bruce at the front table, wearing a navy blazer like she was attending a city council hearing. When she saw me, she gave the room a warm smile. "Ava," she said sweetly, loud enough for several people to hear, "I hope tonight we can keep things constructive." Translation: Behave yourself. I smiled back. "Oh, I plan to." The meeting started the way they always did. Budget recap, pool maintenance updates, someone complaining about a dog that barked after 10 p.m. I waited patiently until Bruce reached the final agenda item. "Community comments," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Anyone?" I raised my hand. Cynthia leaned back in her chair like she had been waiting for this moment all evening. "Yes, Ava?" Bruce said. I stood slowly, turning so everyone in the room could see me. "Hi, everyone. I know I'm new here, so I've spent the last month learning how our HOA operates. Reading the bylaws, reviewing meeting minutes, looking at vendor contracts." A few people shifted in their chairs. Cynthia's smile remained, but it was getting thinner. "I noticed something interesting," I continued. "Our landscaping vendor, Green Horizon Groundskeeping, has billed the HOA for over $48,000 in emergency appearance corrections in the past 18 months. Now people were paying attention." Terrence from Maple Court leaned forward. "Emergency what?" I opened the folder. "These," I said, lifting a sheet, "are invoices labeled Emergency Aesthetic Corrections. Most were approved without board vote and were requested by someone listed as consulting liaison." Every head in the room turned slowly towards Cynthia. She didn't flinch. "That simply means I helped coordinate maintenance issues," she said calmly. "Bruce asked for my assistance." Bruce blinked. Well, sometimes." I held up another paper. "That would make sense," I said. "Except none of these issues appear in the meeting minutes, and several of them involve work done on private property." A murmur rolled through the room. Cynthia's eyes sharpened. "That's not accurate." I tapped the next page. "This one is from 3 weeks ago. Labor billed for removing non-compliant lavender from my walkway." Terrence snorted. Someone else whispered, "You're kidding." Cynthia's voice hardened. "Those plants violated visual continuity standards." "There is no such rule in the bylaws," I said. Silence spread across the room. Then I dropped the real one. "And the person authorizing the work," I continued, "appears to be related to the vendor manager." I slid the final document across the table toward Bruce. He looked down at it, then up, then slowly over at Cynthia. "Is this your son?" he asked. The room went absolutely still, because printed right there on the vendor paperwork was the name Michael Delacroix, Operations Supervisor at Green Horizon. Different last name, same address listed in the contact records. Nina actually whispered, "Oh my God." Cynthia's composure cracked for the first time since I met her. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "No," I said quietly. "It's conflict of interest." Now the room erupted. People started talking all at once. "You never told us that." "She's been approving work?" "That's HOA money." Bruce slammed his hand lightly on the table. "Everyone, please." But the momentum had shifted. I stayed calm. "Look," I said, addressing the room. "I don't think anyone here wants a fight. But HOA funds belong to the homeowners. If one person is directing vendors connected to their own family without board approval, that's a problem." Cynthia stood up so quickly her chair scraped. "You're twisting this," she said. "All I've ever done is help maintain standards in this neighborhood." "Then it should be easy to explain the invoices," I said. Bruce cleared his throat. "I think we may need to suspend landscaping approvals until we review the vendor contract," which in HOA language basically means you're done. Cynthia looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her because she had spent years building quiet authority, years convincing people she was simply protecting property values, and now everyone could see what she had really been doing, using the HOA like her personal project fund, directing work to her son's company, and bullying anyone who questioned it. The meeting dissolved into chaotic discussion, people demanding audits, asking for financial reviews, Bruce promising to contact the management office. Through all of it, Cynthia stood there frozen. Finally, she looked straight at me, and for the first time since we met, she didn't smile. "You planned this," she said quietly. I shrugged. I learned the neighborhood. A few weeks later, Green Horizons' contract was terminated. A financial review forced Cynthia to step down from every committee position she had left. The HOA held a special election. And here's the part that still makes me laugh. Guess who the neighborhood asked to run for the board? Yep. Me, I didn't even campaign. People just wanted someone who read the bylaws. These days, the meetings are still boring, the coffee is still terrible, but nobody gets mysterious violation notices anymore. And Cynthia? She barely leaves her house. Sometimes I see her through the blinds when I'm watering the new lavender along my walkway. She never waves now, but every once in a while I do.